Okay, how's it going? So, just thought I'd do a quick video. In a dark office. Yeah, lights have just got off. Oh well. So, yeah. So I just thought I'd do a quick video just to talk a little bit about what I've been up to recently. So, um, I've been doing all sorts of different things. With I've been planning a lot of content, which is going to be produced in December. But most notably, I've been learning to code, which has been mixed. It's been a struggle, but I've got pretty interesting tech stack established. Um, uh, Let me see if I can pull it up, and I'll try and show you some little bits of it. But while that's actually just setting up, because I didn't have that ready, just talk a little bit about the um, so user interface initially that we've got going on here. So this is quite an early iteration. The color scheme is not established at all. So forgive me for these disgusting goldy yellow things. And it's not fully prototyped, but it's like partially. So we've got some like clickable things that you can click on, and sometimes it glitches out and stuff like that. But yeah, so just kind of going through these sort of things, and um yeah, so obviously it's a bit broken, but yeah, there's a lot of bits that I've been working on there, and that's kind of cool. And then um yeah, we've got the this sort of card design, which I think is going to be quite an interesting little thing if we can if I can pull it together. So basically, it's like clicking on different bits. So let's see if I can actually go on the prototype again. My computer's getting destroyed because the software I use to record this or stream this is like, whoo, pretty rough on the old memory. And then at the same time, I'm trying to like load a virtual machine with like a ton of different servers on to show you this thing that I've been made it and do user interface design on the same thing. So forgive me if this takes a second. But yeah, so we've got like the username, you drop your password in as well, and you kind of come to the sort of this is going to be the home screen kind of thing. So we've got identities and missions, which the individual will create themselves. So it's not like them being told something they don't agree with. So they're kind of then you got a bit of a grateful thing, got a check in thing. But um, yeah, the interesting bit that I'm gonna just sort of demonstrate here. Obviously, the animations are a bit screwed, but we're going to have cards here. So these are going to be the different categories of your life, and they're going to be you're going to be able to see the different bits that you would have there. And then you'll have the next bit, which will be your objectives for each of those different categories of life. So categories of life will be things like health or finance or work or home, something like that. And you'll have different objectives there and the different details around sort of why now, like why are you doing this objective now, like what's the motivation, that kind of thing. And then we'll go into the from the objectives into the outcomes that you're looking for. So it's kind of um, yeah, like the sort of key results effectively that you would need to fulfill those outcomes, for to fulfill those objectives. So let's say, for example, we're doing health. One of your objectives might be something like to feel comfortable in your body or to feel strong or to have a good relationship with food or something like that. So it's quite abstract, not really something super specific. And then these outcomes, this is kind of getting a bit more measurable. And sometimes there might still be kind of abstract, but you kind of want to try if you can to like sort of nail that down to something like a SMART goal. So it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, or something like that. So for example, with the health example, so like let's say if the goal was to be or feel fit, something like that, then it would be like that's your objectives are quite fluffy, quite broad, quite abstract, but kind of emotional at the same time. So you're kind of tapping into that emotional side, which is really positive and actually a really useful thing, which you need to be doing really. And then so we've got these key results. So that might be something like be able to run a marathon as well as I did last year. So it's kind of so we kind of have like instead of just something like oh run a marathon well, it's like as well as last year's. We have like that benchmark, so kind of making that well, which is quite fluffy again. We're making that a bit more sort of concrete and solid. Um, and then we might actually attach something like a time to that. So it might be run a marathon as well as I did last year, which was let's say 15-minute miles or whatever it might be. And so you've got something kind of tangible, and then we'd compare that to where we are now. So let's say if we're currently running 20-minute miles, then maybe we would then consider like what could that goal be, and then so it might be something like, so the overall sort of key result or the overall sort of outcome here would be run a marathon as well as I did last year, moving from running 20-minute miles to 15-minute miles, and then we'd add a date. So it would be 20-minute miles now to 15-minute miles by the end of maybe March, let's say. And so you've got this like really specific thing, which is kind of time bound, and we've got this really nice orientation to move towards. And then once we've got that, we then move into actions. So that's kind of breaking down the steps, which we'll kind of go through in I think it's the mapping section. I haven't got that linked up at the minute, but I can show you that in a moment. So if we go back to here, then, or maybe in check-in or something like that. So we'd select a time for how much time you have to check in, because obviously this is very early, so it's not very developed yet. But then if we go all the way through here, and so you'd start naming it like an outcome. So this would be like very specifically what I've just sort of mentioned there. And then you would link that to an objective, and you'd link that to like a measurement. So that would be kind of a metric. So you'd make it really nice and specific, and then you'd have that date there. Then you review it, and then we want to start to link that to events. So it's like what would actually need to happen to be able to make that happen. And then we would look at the this is a bit broken, but basically we would then start looking at these bits down here. Oh, maybe I haven't got it done yet. Oh yeah, I don't think I've got it done. But basically, like so I sketched out in these little pictures here. So we would have what would you have to do to make it happen, and then what would be like the halfway point, something like that. So what would be the midpoint between what you're doing now and the things you need to do, like look like. So it's like, let's say for example, we've got right now running 20-minute miles, and then you need to be able to run a 15-minute mile to be able to achieve this objective, or have this outcome. So have this outcome of being able to run as well as you did last year, and then that will be achieving the objective of feeling fit. Okay, so we kind of have this correlation directly from this orientation where we are now, which is this kind of, okay, I'm currently at 20-minute miles, I need to be at 15. And then so we have like midpoints, obviously there, it's quite easy to calculate that. In some other things it might be a bit more tricky to kind of figure out what the midpoint might be. But in this case, it's quite a sort of easy, kind of convenient for us to actually sort of figure out what that would be in the middle. So let's say 17.5 minute miles. And so we'd have that as a midpoint, and then we'd be able to put that around maybe the midpoint, or it's just kind of loosely starting off. So we'd start off with maybe a midpoint between now and March. So we kind of have that deadline, and we kind of break that down, and we work down until we get to a point where we can find a manageable step. So we keep repeating this process of looking at the midpoint. So we'd start from A to B, and then we'd add in the middle of A to B. So that would be, for A would be the 20-minute miles, moving to B, which would be the 15-minute miles. And then in the middle, we'd have 17.5 minute miles. And then we would have sort of in between that. So then let's say like 19-minute miles or something like that. And so you kind of keep going in increments. And then you would actually sort of figure out what that might look like. And then you'd also have other activities. For example, what would you need to do? So you actually need to go running, like, and maybe you're not running at the minute. So then that might be another kind of outcome where it's like, another outcome which we're trying to focus on, which would be something like being able to go running like 3 times or 5 times a week, let's say, which is maybe something that you might have done in the past, again, to feel fit. And so that might be something that would facilitate this achievement of this objective. And actually, we can really kind of reflect a bit, and sort of see like, well, where are you now with that? Maybe you're running not at all. And then if you are running, like, how's that going, and sort of what that might be. So then you can figure out where those midpoints might be, and kind of have those as those sort of benchmarks to kind of go through. And then when you're reaching these midpoints, especially that actual midpoint, because you've got quite a few sort of bunched up towards the sort of present, so you can kind of take steps towards them. Then when you reach that midpoint, there'll be sort of a review and a reflection where you'll be able to sort of actually look at, well, how's this going? Like, am I on track to achieve this? Like, is this something that I don't think I'm going to be able to do? How can this be adjusted? Because it's not all about achieving the goals; it's about that journey, and it's much more focused on that. But it's just having something to move towards. That's what makes a journey. It's like, I mean, even a journey that's aimless is still going somewhere in some way. It's like, unless you're stationary, like, which although maybe you could perhaps argue philosophically that could be a journey as well, but there is kind of there is something that you're moving towards, whether you're intentionally moving towards X or Y. If you're taking a step in any direction, there is something which is you're moving towards, and so kind of translating that into, like, starting with something, a destination that you might like in mind, and then trying to take a step towards that, and then seeing what that experience is like, and then reflecting on that, and going through the reflective cycles which I'm building into the system, will be quite an interesting way to sort of start orientating your life. Because then you start with sort of these things that are out there, maybe this like amazing goal of like running this marathon or whatever, and then you might like start moving towards that and realize that actually going running is just doing your knees in. Like, it's just not the one. But then you maybe can think, okay, well, is there something else that I might like to do? I know that exercise is good. I'm quite enjoying the exercise part, but my knees are not appreciating it. Maybe I can do swimming if that's not as hard on your knees. So it's like, okay, perfect. So maybe then you can reorientate, and then you can try and do a swimming race if that was something that you were motivated by. And it's kind of, you set a goal, you set like an orientation towards that, like that outcome. You take a step, reevaluate. What do you think? Where's it going? Like, is this right? Is this not right? And then you can turn towards different things. And so this is obviously quite like a sort of cyclical process, which can kind of seem a little bit isolated, and it can seem like it's just you on your own doing it. But the beauty of what I'm trying to build here is actually that people are going to have their journeys already built into the app. So you'll be able to see similar journeys that other people have taken. So let's say, for example, you're struggling when you're trying to think of the midpoint between where you are now and this goal that you've got. Well, you might be able to see other people's journeys that have been similar to yours. And you might be able to see, well, this is what this person did, and this is how they were successful. And so it's kind of, I haven't quite built that out yet. I'm just building the initial bit for the match section, which is here. So you're going to have like some timelines that are maybe similar to yours. So it's kind of similar to what I've just outlined there, where maybe someone had a similar goal and someone was in a similar position to you, and maybe they did certain things which helped or certain things which hindered, and so you can learn from those. Or you can find a profile which is quite similar to yours, or maybe like the average could also be in this context, where it's the average profile or the average journey. So it's not necessarily personalized, it could be anonymous as well. And so you'd be able to go on and you'd be able to actually look through these pieces of content, and actually, while you're actually creating events or creating objectives, things like that, there will be links to these things integrated into that workflow, so you can effectively step through your own management process, drawing on other people's content at every stage in that process. So it means that you can be constantly reflecting and learning from other people and putting it into practice in your own journey, which then you can then actually act on and implement, and then start to reorientate your own life in accordance with that. So, yeah, we've also got this kind of map feature, which is early in development as well. I've kind of got it a bit more fleshed out in the pictures, but effectively this is going to be data analytics for your life. This, for me, is actually something really, really cool, but it's going to be a little bit longer for people to actually get value from that. But it's one of those things that you might be able to really start to identify, like, oh, wow, like that's actually a real big impact on my life, or that's something which has been a real struggle for me, and this is kind of why. So it's kind of starting to understand yourself a little bit more using the power of data analytics. So as we've got in this example here, obviously this isn't real data, this is just me drawing it. But so if we imagine that the blue line, let's say, was well-being, and then we have maybe exercise in red and eating healthy in green. So then if we look there, we can kind of see there's actually some correlation between these lines, and you can start to understand how these things might intertwine with each other. And actually, we might be able to see that although exercise seems like it has like a real strong correlation, which it definitely does, like when it gets to a certain point, it starts to have less of an impact. Like when it's up at the sort of a higher level, it stops having as much of an impact. But then eating healthy becomes like quite important. So it's kind of so you can start to see like, okay, well, if this drops or that drops, what's that consequence going to be? And you can start to figure out like before things even happen, what your reaction will be to them. And then you can start to see like, well, what do I value? Like for example, maybe you might have sleep, or you might have like the amount of water you drink in, something like that. Sort of these simple things which you can track and actually start to see um how that might look if you were to do this or you were to do that. And then you can start to get quite data driven with the decisions that you're making. So it can be quite clear, like, that you're going to make X choice because you've got all of this data that supports making that choice. And then that's kind of, in some way, it actually takes the personalization or allows you to step out a little bit from that personalized experience in a way which can be quite useful, because it means that it's not like me doing this thing or that person or sort of someone else doing this thing. It's like that's just the data. It's like you're just observing what it is and then making the best choice based on the data. So it's not like, oh, I've done something wrong or right or whatever. It's not like that. It's more just these are kind of the facts that are being presented at the minute, and then kind of working with those as they're developing. So you might be able to sort of step out of that ego role a little bit and then actually find that things can loosen in a way that can be quite inducive, to sort of making progress in life, but also like living a better life generally, whether you're making progress or not, perhaps. So I've gone over kind of quite a few of the main sort of features there. I think there's one other sort of screen that I'm just going to touch on really quickly. I've got a little bit of it down here. So um, this is going to be kind of where you're filling in questionnaires and things around like your personality. So you're going to kind of start to get a bit of a picture about who you are. So you've probably seen similar kind of things to this sort of diagram where it's like looking at different personality traits, and you're also going to have this check-in which leads to the later sort of stages there where you're going to be kind of adding different bits of information, reflecting on the experiences that you're having in the moment, and actually learning from them. And then you can add experience. You can kind of correlate that with a certain aspect of your personality, which can maybe reinforce or maybe weaken certain aspects. And so you can start to build this really nice, well supported version, or understanding maybe is a better way to say it, like a well supported understanding of yourself, which is evidence based, data driven. So you can actually really see like, oh well, I'm actually this person because I've got these kind of experiences in the past. I've done this thing, or I've had this reaction, or whatever it might be. So you can start to see yourself and actually reflect and become much more self-aware. And then that awareness, it then enables you to reflect on that, and then gives you that power, that choice to actually choose how you want to orientate yourself in relation to that, how you then prepare yourself to then move forward with that in mind, that orientation and those observations and reflections, and then actually act. Potentially that's in a different way. And that's actually the core sort of cycle which the app is going to be kind of helping people to go through. So observing and then reflecting upon that observation, and then orientating based on that reflection, and then preparing based on the orientation, and then acting based on the preparation, which will lead to outcomes and results, which then can be observed once again, and that cycle starts again. So that's actually going to be the topic for a 15-part series, which I'm going to be creating over the next year. It's going to be a podcast, which I'm going to be filming with a really close friend of mine and someone that I've been working a lot and discussing, sort of bouncing ideas off with him. So we're going to be sort of discussing that hopefully over the Christmas period. And that's going to be kind of going into more detail around what those different sections look like, the kind of theory behind those things, tips and tricks, techniques, but then mainly we'll be focusing on actual experience. So like, what does that look like on the day to day? What does that practically look like if you were to implement observation, for example, or reflection or orientation? What does that practically look like? And how does the app and the system actually work with you to go through that process? And how does it support you? So it's really enabling people to understand the process, but then also maybe even practically doing it themselves, as well as providing the support to potentially provide that to them outside of their own initiative. So it's kind of having these sort of guided process, which they can do repeatedly, and actually it's going to get sort of more and more powerful for them because they'll be able to see more and more correlation between certain events and certain maybe metrics and things like that. So you'll be able to start actually understanding yourself in a much clearer light and start to see habit patterns as they have formed, and then you already know where you're going to end up based on the previous habit patterns, because you're just so kind of in tune, because you've got all of that data and you've been able to reflect on that in a way which is quite a sort of abstract sort of view. So you're taking that third person perspective and just observing what is present, and then actually allowing yourself to move forward in life. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of the user experience. Just to touch really quickly on the sort of coding side of things. So this is a bit a bit complicated. So apologies if this doesn't really make sense to everybody. But let's see if I can actually jump on here. So basically, oh no, that's the wrong thing. Let me see if I can actually just really quickly add this. Okay, so this is called Docker, and basically all of these different green things here. So we've got Worker, Web, Postgres. All of those are effectively like virtual computers or virtual machines, and so they're kind of running separate to each other. Now, this is really, really useful in coding because it means that you can do one thing. For example, like I can stop this specific part, which so that just that individual part will change the way that the system looks. It doesn't look beautiful at the minute, but it means that I can stop that, restart that, I can update that in a way which doesn't require me to, for example, totally relaunch the server, and like, or totally relaunch the database, for example. And so similarly, I can do that with the front end, which is actually what you're sort of looking at, which we'll just open up real quick. It doesn't look pretty, but I'm going to try and explain the functionality of it and why kind of I'm building the way that I'm building, and actually the potential for this kind of system. Um, so it means that you can, as I said, like with Docker, it means that you can actually interact with this in a way which is much more secure, much more robust, because it means if one part goes down, the entire system doesn't necessarily go down, and that means that you can kind of do a lot with that. So just to kind of explain the actual sort of systems that I've got set up here. So we have Postgres, which is Postgres SQL, which is a relational database, and that basically it's kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. Just think of it like that, and then that has connections between different things. That's basically as much as you need to know. Um, and then Redis, this is called a cache. So this is, let's say, for example, you're accessing some information, and then you maybe need to use that information again and again. And so that will be stored in the cache because it's more accessible. So it's easier to access Redis for data and information than it is for Postgres. Postgres is kind of more like long-term, like big data sets, like really interconnected, quite complex. Redis is sort of more like small, fast, and much quicker information. So having both of these creates a really, really positive developer and user experience, because it means you can have those separated out for the developers, but then also the user experience is going to be phenomenal, which I'll touch on in a minute. So we then have the web, which is, and this is kind of like the server. So this is based on Django in Python, and this is a really, really powerful, well-built system which other people have developed, and I'm just kind of using. Basically, it's perfect. We have a worker. This is a effectively it's a little bit complex, but when people make requests to the website, so they'll go, for example, to the let's just show you this real quick. So if we jump across to, whoa, that was fun, wasn't it? Oh, again. Okay, so we're back on the website, and then so I didn't realize my camera wasn't there. Oh well. Oh, uh, let's do that. Ta-da! Sorry. I'm having too much fun. So, for example, when we go here and we're now on the website, we would call this URL, and then that communicates with Django in the end. But basically, we have this worker which would actually, when we submit this, there's actually some data that needs to be collected. As you can see, there's not very much data at the minute. Like, it doesn't look super pretty. But we'll show you some functionality in a moment. But for now, just understanding that there's tasks that need to be done as a result of calling a URL, and then a worker distributes those tasks in order to enable the server to be able to manage them in an efficient way. So this is absolutely critical if you want to have a system which is efficient for multiple users, because you need to be able to distribute those tasks and have them running in parallel asynchronously, is what it's called. So it's basically doing more than one thing at once. And this is exceptionally valuable. And with Redis, this works very, very nicely. So I'm using gUnicorn as the main server, which is synchronous. So that's not running in parallel. And then we have Uvnicorn, which is running asynchronously. So that's kind of running in parallel, which means that you can do some really, really cool things, which I'll show you in just a moment. We then have the JavaScript, which is kind of functionality on the front end, and CSS, which is the cascading style sheets, and they are basically the styles, like how it looks like. So we then have the website. As you can see, I haven't got many styles there yet, but I've been focusing a lot more on the functionality side because I know that I've been doing the design and I know that it's not going to look anything like what I make initially. And I was just kind of learning how to do this. But basically, we have this really interesting kind of system here where we can actually open, let's see if we can do this. We can open multiple tabs. Let's hope this works because I haven't tried this in a couple of days, so we'll see if this works. But we can basically I have multiple tabs, and then as you can see, so I've added here so timeline 1, let's say, and then as you can see on the one on the left, it automatically updates. So this is functionality which is exceptionally cool because this means that different users can be interacting with each other in real time, and it allows for updates in a way which is very, very seamless. And then we also have this kind of server side, client side stuff, which is kind of cool as well. And this is just a very simple interaction, but the way this is constructed is very reusable. So if I wanted to make another one of these, I could make it very, very easily. Like I wouldn't have to add much more code, and I will be able to produce the exact same thing in a different place. And that might not sound like a big deal, but when you're constructing a website, it's actually very useful on the front end to modularize the sort of different things, the different functionality which you're doing. So then, for example, let's say if you're trying to call, like let's say you wanted to have the price of a speaker and you wanted to have the price of a mouse, then like the price of, you could containerize and modularize that. So then you could effectively just connect that functionality to the speaker and to the mouse, and it would be one thing on the front end rather than having to make two separate functions, which would be much, much more efficient to sort of do it in one way. And so then, we also then can kind of go into the message system and then have a kind of a similar thing where you just kind of add in different bits there. And then, so there's some little different bits there, which this, although doesn't look like very much, this is really quite an interesting piece of functionality, because on the back end, normally what's sent is JavaScript. Now, it doesn't really matter so much what JavaScript does, but all you need to know effectively is when JavaScript arrives to like the client's device, so like a laptop or a phone or an iPad or whatever, the client then has to, or the computer, the piece of hardware, like the phone, has to then process that to generate information, which then you can see on the screen. So the difference with what I'm using here, this system, instead of sending that which needs to then be processed, I'm sending the data and it's already processed. So I've done the processing on the server, and then I'm sending just the information that needs to be seen by the user. Now this, although this doesn't seem like a big deal, this is absolutely huge, because it means that the efficiency which you can gain as a result because you're doing all of the processing and all of the rendering on the server. So it means that the actual user, they don't need to have a good phone. They don't need to have like the best laptop to be able to process something, even if it's advanced. So then when we're looking at the advanced analytics, which I'm going to be trying to do, and the sort of graphs and the like quite complex navigation system, all of that information for an individual user to process that would be exceptionally time consuming. And so instead of them being on the website and getting it almost instantly, which is what we'll be getting at the minute, they'll be just waiting. They'll be sat on their phone and they'll just be waiting for things to load, which will have a significant barrier to that user and make it much more likely for them to just leave or not use the system. So having this speed enables us to do a lot of really cool things in terms of providing additional functionality which otherwise might not be possible for those phones or those devices. So, and because I'm developing it mobile first with the user interface in mind, the web interface is going to be quite similar, but the mobile first is definitely the orientation. As a result of that, I'm trying to build the back end as well with that in mind. So this same sort of process, this same kind of sending the what you actually see, rather than sending sort of things that need to be processed. So that will be sending HTML rather than JavaScript. So by sending HTML to the user, and so they can immediately view that, that's actually very, very useful for mobiles, because it's generally mobiles that struggle the most with websites because they don't have as much processing power as computers or iPads, something like that. And then additionally, this allows, in the long run, will allow for the extension into mobile and like mobile apps much more easily, because this same principle of using HTML, that and this kind of sending the what's seen over to the client rather than the sort of things that needs to be processed. So sending that can be done through apps as well. So effectively, you can have sort of the skeleton of an app, and then you can send a lot of the same information using this same process um, to the app, which means that you don't have to develop as much, and you almost have this centralized hub where there's consistent pieces of information that are coming out in a way which is easily accessible and easily manageable by any device, because there's not much processing to do with it. And so you can send that out to various different locations, and it can just be received by a website or by an Android app or by an iOS app. So this means that the development on the front end for each of those different things is a lot smoother. And as well, especially with the apps, generally there's quite a long wait time before things can get approved, like updates can get approved. Now, this isn't necessarily an issue, but if you're trying to solve bugs and launch things quite quickly, you need to get feedback as soon as you possibly can from your users. And if there's a security risk or something like that, that needs to be solved as soon as possible. So by being able to send this already processed information, less of the app needs to change. And so you can kind of have effectively a window that someone would view this content in, and then that would be the sort of main aspect of the app. And it would mean that you would be able to do updates, minor sort of small changes here and there, which normally you would have to get approved by Google or by Apple, depending on which sort of app store you're on. And that kind of adds an extra layer, and like it just slows down the development, because that cycle is just a lot slower. And so basically, if I can do this in a manner where I'm sending the pre-processed, pre-rendered, pre-made content to the users, then it means that I can actually avoid some of those barriers. So it means that instead of having to wait till Google is happy with it, I can actually send these things out almost as soon as we find the bug and make the fix. We can then test it a little bit on sort of not with users, kind of automated testing, things like that. And then we can launch that straight out to the users without the need to sort of wait for Google or Apple to approve these things. So it means that security can be improved, and sort of fixes with different bugs can be made, as well as actually continuous iterations can be developed and constantly like evolving the application, which means that we can not get exactly the same, but we can get much closer to the development speed of web, because with web there's no barriers. There's not like, you don't have to get it approved by anybody. You can just straight away upload it, and so it means that we can start to move towards that in mobile as well. And since the application is going to be mobile first, because of the type of sort of people we're trying to work with, it's actually a really solid piece of infrastructure that will enable us to not only provide an amazing user experience, but also make sure that it's nice and secure, make sure that it's constantly updated, and has a much, much nicer developer experience, because you don't have anywhere close to the same level of complexity. You don't have to know loads of different languages in depth. You can just use this as a kind of the core basis, and you just reskin that effectively with different front ends. So yeah, so that's kind of a quick summary of the sort of a little bit of an update about what I've been up to. I've got a couple of meetings next week, which should be good, with different organizations, Newcastle Uni, Software City, and then one with my mentor. So looking forward to all of those. Got a lot to do still. Going to try and have the clickable prototype done by, well, let's say maybe tomorrow. That's the plan. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday, I can actually be using that in meetings, and Thursday as well. And then, yeah, we're going to be in a good position. I was thinking a little bit today as well about um, sort of like a one-line summary for the organization. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and like I've gone through various iterations, but I feel like one that's kind of quite good, because because the app does a lot, and that's a barrier. But at the same time, I think it's almost like there's, maybe it's necessary, maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe it's just I feel like it is. But so but I'm thinking about this one liner, and the one liner that I'm on at the minute, which will probably change, is uh we we inspire young people by helping them to find relatable role models. So we inspire young people by helping them to find relatable role models. And um yeah, or something like we help young people to follow in the footsteps of relatable role models. So it's kind of, I feel like the footsteps one's kind of good, but then at the same time, I feel like that's getting a bit um maybe jargony, perhaps. I don't necessarily know. It's like it's using colloquialisms, and I don't really. I want to keep it simple, and like inspiring young people by helping them find relatable role models is very. It's kind of okay, right? I got you. Whereas like following the footsteps, it's like, what does that mean? So the inspiring, I think, is the way to go, but it doesn't quite capture everything. So it doesn't capture like the management or the mapping side. It just captures the seeing other people's journeys. But you kind of need to have the sort of other infrastructure, like the mapping and the management, for actually people to um, actually document their journeys. You have to have some way for them to do that. So you have to make those things for them to be able to see them. So it's a bit tricky, but nevertheless, I think there's a good challenge ahead, and there's a lot of progress. There's also tons of different content that we're going to be producing over Christmas, podcast, and with the 15 episodes, as I mentioned before. We're also going to be making, or trying to make, a bit of a sort of viral campaign, a bit fun, taking advantage of the quiet day on Christmas, and trying to go to really busy places pre-Christmas, get some footage where there's tons of people around, and then film also on Christmas Day, or when it's quiet, basically, and then say something like, um, it's okay if you've got people around you that you look up to, but what if there's no one you look up to? Or um, what if the people around you aren't inspiring to you? And then we transition between like super busy to really quiet in the same thing, with somebody stood there in the same position, same kind of clothes and stuff like that. And then it'd be quite like a stark sort of 5 second like pop, which hopefully will look quite good on social media. And I'm going to try and get a few friends to get involved as well. So hopefully we'll pick up a couple of different sort of videos from different people, and that should be really cool. But yeah, that's all for now. Maybe like this is maybe like a 10-day or something review. There's absolutely tons of stuff to be doing. Oh, I wasn't able to show you the two things. I didn't realize that my um what, man? I didn't realize that my screen wasn't like that. So just to illustrate the real time, So if we type in pizza here, if we watch on this screen, uh, so if you watch on this screen here, we're going to see another pizza pop up. So it's like basically instant. Um, it's like just as fast as on the screen that's actually submitting it. So it's super cool. But anyway, yeah, that's all for today. And yeah, thanks for watching.